Welcome to another Animation Friday. I apologize I had to delay this video. I was pretty busy over the weekend, but now I should be caught up as of the end of Sunday. So without further ado, for this particular Animation Friday, I thought it'd be interesting to briefly talk about my thoughts in regards to the connection between animation and video games. Now, I will say I'm not really the biggest fan of video games. I always thought video games were kind of just not for me in particular. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I just prefer seeing stories and sort of other people's ideas instead of constantly trying to navigate myself through a particular world or whatnot. Um, and obviously, the limiting options and whatnot are also something that's, again, a little thing that's always never made me all too enthusiastic about video games, but I do understand their importance and their significance over the years, and I think a lot of this can be attributed to animation, since primarily when you look at video games, they are sort of in that animation format, at least primarily. Over the years, it's obviously become a lot more realistic looking now, since over time, video games have been able to be more enhanced uh, as far as the visuals are concerned, and also by the fact that you get a lot of different forms of technology that have come out that have allowed video games to be a lot more detailed and a lot more in depth and interesting and engaging to people. Now, I think the connection obviously is not only from a visual point of view, but also um, from a sort of, I guess you could say, sort of storytelling point of view, because again, with video games, you get that sort of escapism that is sort of similar to animation, to where you do things that you can't really necessarily do in real life and may or may not be as practical within the real life setting. Um, and that ultimately allows video games to be a very immersive and more visually and emotionally based experience, which is again something that animation has been known to be really good at. Um, as far as also another thing that is important to note is the fact that with animation, it has sort of its own separate genres, like adventure, and some can be within the realms of science fiction. And it's sort of the same thing with video games, to where you have video games that are more fantasy oriented, and then you have games that are more sci-fi oriented. And again, you get these various different kinds of environments, and when you do, there's a lot of creativity that comes out of that as well. So again, this connection, I think, has a lot to do with the fact that we do, from not only computers, but also through um, the means in which those kinds of computer programs are sort of used to sort of create the video games. And obviously, you have to sort of start from scratch, similar to with animation, where you have to kind of draw a little bit of a visual out to kind of see what you ultimately want the character to look like. But it's really something that, again, is very geared and is very similar to a lot of animated material. Um, Obviously, there have been a lot of video games that have been based off of various animation. Um, and in and of itself, you could even argue that video games oftentimes sort of get attributed to animation based upon what we sort of see within animated films. Like, for example, the more recent film, Wreck-It Ralph, did involve heavily in referencing video games. And I think that's just something that's really important to note, because you can really see the connections that are made when you really kind of look into that film. And when you also just look at the way in which video games are constructed and how animation is created, you see the similarities and how they're sort of connected to one another. And I think video games owe themselves a lot to animation, because if it weren't for animation sort of taking itself off the ground, then I don't think video games would have come to its full fruition into a way in which we see it today, because a lot of the movement, a lot of the way in which characters interact, and all of that is really heavily, again, generated based upon using animation as a medium, and doesn't rely as heavily on real life. But again, obviously there are some video games that are a little bit more on the realistic side, and they are getting way more realistic as time has gone on. But at the same time, there seems to be, again, this significant disconnect uh, from video games to reality, considering the fact that video games try to create their own sort of world in the way in which animation tries to create its own sort of world as well. So again, these connections I think are definitely not just coincidence, and I think they lend themselves to learning from one another. I think both uh, pieces of entertainment can learn from each other and get various techniques and understandings to where they'll actually benefit probably one another, and in doing so, benefit the sort of artistry behind them. But I think that's really all I can say as far as the connection between video games and animation, but I would be more than happy to hear what anybody else has to say in regards to this topic. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.